Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Jan Hoath. Jan, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
I shall gladly dive in right there. Although, how much time do we have? So my name is Jan Hoath, and I am known as the Queen of Joy, a mindful joy mentor, and a whole bunch of other things, including mom and wife and community leader. I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I work primarily virtually, and yet my mission and what I do in the world is I bring joy, especially to busy entrepreneurs and leaders who kind of forgot their joy along the way. Because what I've learned over my lifetime and what I've found in the hundreds of entrepreneurs and leaders that I have already worked with is joy is a superpower. Who knew? It's actually the basis of everything because it is an energy and it's the way we show up in our life and our business that makes all the difference in the actions that we take. And so I essentially help leaders find their soul superpower of joy, and from there go out and make the impact they came here to make and have great lives and have happy families in the process.
Thank you for the introduction. I do have a whole long list of things that I get to ask you about. But to start off with, believe it or not, when people look at me, they don't often say, you look so joyful. In fact, I have had many people say, are you okay? Like my default setting is not joyful. So what advice would you give someone in that particular scenario?
First and foremost, the reason I love teaching joy and being really, I guess, essentially the authority on joy is, for me, joy is an acronym of just own you. And I personally I have a big smile. I know I have a very vibrant presence, but that's not everybody's default. That's not who you are. That's who I am. And so when I'm working with individuals and, even just having a conversation like we are, the invitation is understanding that joy and happiness is personal. And sometimes it's bouncing off the wall happy, and sometimes it's a beautiful contentment. And yet it's personal. It doesn't need to be for other people either. It's for you. So my invitation is always to just own you. And look, that may not be that, bubbly, outgoing person, but I'm not meant to be you, and you are definitely not meant to be me. So just owning you is my little tidbit there.
Well, I think talking to you would be a good start for me. So I appreciate you being on the episode today. But you touched on something which is about who you are. And the first question is how to discover who you really are. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, it is a discovery, and it's really a never ending discovery process, really, because I kind of believe it's like, well, we're still walking around this planet, and whatever your, spiritual, religious beliefs are, I believe we come into this physical form and call ourselves human, and we get to experience life in this way. But I do believe there's something and so much more beyond that. And yet I do believe there's an exploratory process. And what I personally do believe too is that this life is a gift, and we get to choose how we relate to it, how we receive it, how we experience it. And the question of like, who am I, and what is that to just own me, for example, is truly a moment to moment evolutionary experience. So I actually teach on the basis of mindful joy, and starting with mindfulness, as I define it, as present moment awareness. And so it invites the thoughts to come in center of like, well, who am I today? Who am I right now? And what does that look like? What does that feel like? What do I get to experience at this space? Because really, whatever author, speaker, or thought leader you communicate with or connect with, the truth is all we have is now. Time is a human construct. Past and future. The past is in the past. The future is yet to come. So all we have is now. And what I always invite my clients and audience to do is look at, well, who am I today and where am I at? And then that's kind of like a GPS. And that's the starting point. Like when you get into your car or when you go out on a trail, hooray for digital devices now that we have that opportunity to have a GPS, a global positioning system. Like, well, where am I at emotionally today? And that's where the mindful joy piece comes in. But then where do I want to head? Where do I want to go, personally and professionally? And then looking at that space and then looking at, well, what's it going to take to get there? And that's where the discovery process gets really interesting because it's like, okay, I'm here now. I want to be there, whatever that is, whether it's a, professional um, outcome, some kind of a goal in your business and what you're creating, and realizing, well, I'm not there. So what's it going to take to be there? Well, and what I would essentially say is it's actually joy is both the destination and the journey. And yet in the discovery process, we get to see, wow, it's not always roses and rainbows. As much as I like roses, rainbows, and unicorns. And yet realizing that that personal discovery process is it's actually sifting and sorting through preferences. I did this action that felt good. I did this action, it didn't feel good. And then that is part of the process of every day tuning into, wow, what did I like about that? What didn't I like about that? What do I think about this now? And then realizing like I'm, happily in my fourth decade around the sun. And it's like, wow, what I enjoy and what I found valuable and who I am today is very different in many ways from myself 20 years ago. But then there's some core items that are pretty consistent that I'm a happy person and I love people and I love connection. So the kind of a long answer to your question, but the discovery process of like, who are you or who am I? It really does get to be a journey and it gets to be a beautiful one if you let it.
Well, I was going to say about being in the present versus thinking about the past or, in the future. I think most people agree with they need to be more in the present, but struggle with the actual how to do that. But would you say your answer to that is basically checking in regularly?
Yes. I mean, I have a personal process and a framework that came to me over numerous challenging circumstances that I experienced in my life. And it's certainly a more sophisticated process, but simple terms, checking in with the now is the quickest way to get into present moment awareness. Like, especially if something's really stressful at work or in your personal life, what just happened, I don't know why, but like a car crash is coming up. Like, okay, car crash happens. All right, that happened. Where am I at right now? Like right now. Don't go into what's this going to cost to repair and, what's broken, whatever, but tuning in like, where am I at right now? And that question, along with breathing, because part of what I do teach and promote is also meditation. And yet, meditation for many sounds like a big task. But meditation can be simplified to just breathe deeply and pause for a second, because that can make all the difference between taking the next step in what you're about to do in a place of power or a place of disempowerment.
Great answer. On the topic of the difference between joy and happiness, um, the definition there, when you use the word joy, are you using it in the general kind of um, societal definition, or are you using it from a just own you perspective?
What do you think? I'm so curious of your opinion, but yeah, I mean, I have, the way I feel about happiness and joy and really any words is like the author, speaker, thought leader Eckhart Tolle talks about words are just signposts to something more. And we could sit here, and especially, we're in different cultures. We could sit here and talk about what's the cultural definition of happiness and joy. What's the, societal, what's your personal. And when it comes down to it, the way I do teach it and live by is the invitation of like what it is to just own you today. Like what does that look like? What does that feel like? Because just like anything, when we try to live under a definition that we can't line up with, it's always going to be clunky and it's not going to work out. So the way I do come down to it is ultimately, and I, part of my story is early on I connected with this framework I was starting to talk about called the happiness prism, because happiness to me was joy. But then I started meeting people who didn't understand that presence of happiness that I attuned to. And that's when I started to get into this notion of, well, joy for many people is this internal job and happiness is an external, um, influential experience. And that's when I really started to discover that it's personal. It's really personal. And I always invite my audiences and clients to tune into what's going to serve you to get out of bed in the day, to move forward on that task, and especially to move forward on some challenging things. Because especially as a business owner, as you know, it's not always, an easy step. And in fact, especially being an entrepreneur, it's downright challenging because you're trailblazing pretty much every day. There's certain tasks and things that you're up to that, yes, you can get best practices from peers, colleagues, mentors. But at the end of the day, it's you on your path moving forward. And what's going to light you up to tune into that soul superpower, as I like to say, that's going to have you move forward in a way that's really going to be serving, impactful, and of course generate the business growth that you're seeking.
It reminds me of because I have often talked about the definition of success. So, and I use Earl Nightingale's, if you've heard of Earl, and his is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. But I often catch myself using the term success, which is like the societal definition. So do you sort of go to and from what they might be, or are you just full on with the just own you?
Well, yes. I mean, again, and I love that you brought in the definition of success as well, because I think that's really also ultimately, these are big, they're little words, but big life topics. And, this is where I start to go big vision. And, I've had some personal experiences that caused me to ask these bigger questions. But it's like ultimately thinking about like when you get to the end of this life, whenever that is, and the whole notion that when we're on our deathbed, we're not going to question. Most of the people question and regret not making the most of this life, and realize that ultimately it's not necessarily all the achievements that we care about as much as in the moment, that short-term happiness, that short-term pleasure, but not necessarily sustaining. And that's where the invitation and really the basis of my work comes into, really enjoying from an internal place, moment to moment, the experience, the connections, the relationships, the impact we get to have, the experience we get to have, even just witnessing others in their joy. And so to kind of answer the question, yes, I do come back to it's a personal experience, whether it's joy or success or any of that, because again, when we go outside of ourselves to fulfill something that's not in our heart, not in our soul, it's never going to be satisfying. And that is where we get to that regret in life.
I have been thinking about, if you were at the end of your life, and it's like a continual thing, but it's come back up recently. And
Mhm.
one of the things I know that I think there's five big ones that tend to repeat. But one of the ones which I've thought about recently is just worry, which kind of you touch on that. If you were able to be in the present moment, you wouldn't be worrying about the future, perhaps. But have you made any conclusions about how you live your life, based on the fact that at some stage we're all going to be looking back on it?
Yeah. Well, and if I can share a tender story, because I feel like this really helps explain further the gravity of why I stand where I stand with all this. And before we started, I mentioned I have an Australian husband, and um, his folks were over visiting us, and this was back in 2007. And it was so wonderful. Had so much fun having them come over and staying with my folks. And we ended up letting them go out on a bike ride, and my in-laws were on their own, and they're in the United States. And about an hour later, we got a dreaded phone call, like the dreaded phone call. My mother-in-law, being Australian, looked the wrong way when she went to cross the road, and she was tragically struck and killed. And it was shortly after she had gone into retirement. She and her husband had all of these plans. We had all of these plans. And then the gravity of the experience, because it turned out very dramatic. I don't need to go into details, but it was so fascinating because I had moments of regret that I, married my husband, because if we hadn't gotten married, maybe this wouldn't have happened. She wouldn't have come over to us, to America. And then thinking about the regret of all the life they didn't get to live because they were, working towards their retirement, and all of these pieces, and just being so viscerally inside of that experience of like witnessing my father-in-law feeling so much regret. I was like, wow, it just makes everything come front and center to the moment of like, how am I living this day, this moment, this breath to the fullest? And, I know so many people listening can identify in some capacity to that experience. But I realized that was actually the catalyst for me starting my coaching business. Up until then, I'd known I wanted to coach people and having great lives. And at this point, it was like, I can't wait any longer. People need to understand, how do you approach this life from that space? And it really does come down to present moment awareness. When you're in present moment awareness, when you're tuning into what feels really good inside, because our emotions are a guidance system. When a situation feels good, we share love, we share compassion, we share compliments, we share ideas, we're generous, we're serving and uplifting and life-giving to others. And when we are in that present moment space, that's when we have quality over quantity. That's where I have two beautiful children, and that's where I can have a card game before breakfast and then dive into a podcast and feel great about myself, knowing that I'm being all of who I'm meant to be in this life. And it's from that space that I can wholeheartedly say that if I did, croak today, right now, after this podcast, I'd feel great about myself, because I know I showed up. I know I shared my heart with everyone that matters. And I know that I'm being and doing what I'm meant to be and do. Now, do I have bigger visions and desires? Absolutely. But that is the part where I also teach you, and that's a mindfulness piece of non-attachment, and realizing that, we can strive for a goal and an intention, and what we're building in our businesses or personal endeavors. I happen to be a runner and a skier and a surfer, and I just really appreciate exploring what's possible in my potential as a human being as much as a thought leader. But I also recognize that as much as I can have these big desires and visions, that my human brain is also very limited into what's possible. And when I let myself go and say, well, I'm going to show up, be the best that I can be, and do the best that I can do, and then hand the rest over and have that non-attachment factor that mindfulness teaches, then that all the more allows for that space of really the no regrets. And what it does is, yes, it completely alleviates worry, because worry is a waste of energy. It's doing nothing because it's sitting there and it's having a thought, and it's future based. And that's where I always bring people back into, well, what's so now and what can we do now? Like, what can we do now and then now and then now? So kind of a long answer, but
I'm sorry to hear about the story, but thank you for sharing it anyway. And you did mention your prism. Is it the happiness prism that you said?
mm-hmm.
Do you want to share what that is?
I would love to. Yes. So the happiness prism is a framework that I discovered through three major monumental circumstances that I experienced in life, including the tragic loss of my mother-in-law. And it was through that that I discovered the energy and element of progress, that I realized on a really day-to-day moment that when we are progressing, we feel good in life. And I define progress as purpose in motion. Well, earlier in my life journey, as a teenager, I actually experienced severe depression. And through that depression, when I was really questioning this world and this life, and I was taking antidepressants, happy pills that I hated, and just realized something is not it. This is not it. I knew that there was something more, but I didn't know what it was. And I had an angel in the form of a German substitute teacher show up in my life who said, "Hey, Jan, I think you might appreciate applying for the scholarship to be an exchange student in Germany." And all the light bulbs went out inside of me thinking, wow, I can leave this town and this life that I know and go be someone else. And I poured my heart into the application. I ended up getting the scholarship, and I ended up healing myself from depression because wasn't exactly, this was back in the 90s, wasn't exactly going to go overseas before internet and everything else and have minimal communication. And realized that by having a playful future, I essentially healed myself. And play I define as joy in motion, and that's the other side of the happiness prism. And yet, realizing between play and progress, there was still something missing. So, flash forward in my life, I have an amazing son. He's 6 weeks old, and I have a 2-year-old daughter. And it was in oh, it was such a fascinating morning. We woke up and he was happy and chirpy, and I was changing his little onesie. And then the next thing you know, something's not right. His arm's swollen. And about 8 hours later, I find myself in the cancer wing of the Children's Hospital. We don't know if it's cancer, but it's life threatening, whatever's going on with him. And up until then, I was life coaching. I was doing a lot of personal growth and working a lot with my clients on mindset. But in that space, I realized I couldn't think my way out of this. I couldn't create a new thought that was going to change this outcome at this very moment. All I knew was this is beyond me, and this is not how this story ends. I was adamant that his story doesn't end this way and mine doesn't end this way as his mother. And yet at that time, though, waterworks, tears, and just looking around this dark hospital room thinking, help, I need help. And that was really when I first gave myself over to something more. And look, this is non-religious, this is spiritual, this is realizing that, again, there's something more beyond this limited human brain inside of me. But I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to surrender and ultimately tune into the energy of peace, which I define as prayer in motion. And through that experience, I realized that rounded out my happiness prism, that when we honor play, peace, and progress, that we are ultimately optimized in this joy energy and we get to experience happiness. And that's ultimately how we move forward in life with the no regrets life. Now, as far as the story goes with my son, he is a thriving 9-year-old boy. He's actually downstairs right now while I'm here with you.
Glad to hear it.
Yes. And what we ultimately experienced inside of the hospital over those 12 excruciating days was I honored these energies I'm talking about here: play, peace, and progress. And this actually leads to one of my other stories that I'm known for. And that is the next morning after I had opened up and said, help. The next morning, as a breastfeeding mother, I could order off the menu. And look, we're in a children's hospital. And through my tears, I realized I could order something called Fruit Loops. I don't know if you know what Fruit Loops are, but they're a cheesy American cereal that are really colorful
Very
and
nice.
really not healthy. And so the first voice that came to me was, you can't order that. That's not nutritional for you or for your child. And then the next larger voice, a higher version of myself, came through and said, oh, yeah, you're going to order the Fruit Loops and you're going to enjoy it. And so that's what I did. I ordered the Fruit Loops. I watched all of the colors swirl around, the really not natural, but so colorful and beautiful. And I ate those Fruit Loops. And you know what? It put me in that joy state that I was talking about earlier, in which science has now proven, that spiritual leaders have known for centuries, is that we're in a clearer state of mind, we're in a higher level of consciousness, we're efficient, more effective, more creative, more innovative. But it was from that state that was my play that day. And then the next part is I took some breaths and tuned in and let myself cry and grieve whatever was happening. But then I got clear headed. And then that's how I progressed and was able to have the tough conversations with the doctors, making the tough decisions. I don't know if you've ever been in a medical crisis, but the doctors tell you all of their woe and, terrible news. And then they say, make a decision. It's like, oh, great, which is the lesser of two evils? Well, I was able to be in a sound state to advocate for my son. And then, as you already know, the story ends with a happy ending. But what's really cool is we actually never got a medical diagnosis. And then it was ultimately decided that he is a medical miracle. Even the doctors were saying that. They were blown away that we got out of there, that he healed, even though we had this dip in wonder and indescribable medical, physical experience. And yet I ultimately do believe that through my joy and the happiness prism, and obviously all the support that came from the doctors and even him, like my son was just laying there smiling at me pretty much the whole time, even when there was a dip in his health. But it was still an amazing experience. And that's what I found since then, though, is with the happiness prism, which I apply to my daily life, but I also apply it to vision projecting. I support my clients in generating their life vision, their day vision through the happiness prism. And what I have found is this experience unanimously that people realize that's when they do have that experience, when they hit their head on the pillow at night, that they're satisfied, that they showed up, they were present with their family, they're present in their business, and then they're also most effective in moving forward in whatever actions those were that day.
Another great answer. Thank you. One of the things that struck me was I think lots of people have, let's say, positive and negative experiences in their life, but not everyone creates these sort of, I don't know, would you say strategies or thought processes like you have? Any thoughts there on why or how you were able to do that?
Well, I mean, very humbly, I feel like I was divinely blessed to be able to have that outlook, that as sucky as something gets, that there's going to be a silver lining. I don't think everyone has that outlook early on, but I do believe that that's trainable. And that's what's really cool about positive psychologist Sean Aker has discovered, that they used to think that we as human beings have like a set point for our happiness. But they've actually found that when you train the brain to essentially look for the good, in any image, in any experience, you can always see the negative or the positive. But if you actually train your brain to look for the good, you will build neural pathways that will have you see that more and more. It's kind of like, when you decide you want a new car, and then all of a sudden you see that car everywhere. It's the same phenomenon that happens when you start to look for the good. So I do believe I was predisposed early on to try to look for the silver lining, if you will. And then I also harnessed and sharpened that skill through these practices that I both teach and breathe, essentially. But anyone can train their brain to start looking for the good. But first and foremost, before we even get to that point, my invitation is always for people to look at whatever's happening to them, to realize it's happening for you as an opportunity to learn and grow through. A lot of times, and I know early on I had these moments too until I really harnessed the skill, was, we can have victim mentality. Like, poor me, this is happening to me, what am I going to do? And we get into a place of disempowerment. But when you start to look at and shift the focus to, okay, why is this happening for me? What can I learn from this? And how can I grow through this? And then as I now speak to and invite people into, what's the Fruit Loop moment here? Like, what's something that I can look for that's going to make me laugh? It's fascinating to me ever since realizing the Fruit Loop moment is that even in the suckiest circumstances, and I even look back at when we lost my mother-in-law, and I can vividly remember a moment where we were all gathered around the dinner table, and I can't remember how many nights after this was, but there was a joyous laughter and there was a joyous moment. And so I also invite everyone and encourage everyone to realize that even in the crummiest of circumstances, there is a rainbow. We talk about like the darkest of clouds create some of the most beautiful sunny days afterwards, or the most beautiful rainbows. And so realizing it's not an either or, it's an and. And that's something that I also feel called to speak to, because I think that's a lot of times, I show up in a conversation like this and it's like, well, she's happy, she just is naturally that way. And it's like, yes, I do believe at some point I was predisposed a little bit, but I also have this passionate desire to realize that I can grow through these challenging spaces to find the joy again. And this is available to everyone. And to realize that it's not just the joy, it's the not joy as I describe it that offers the contrast. It's just like the stars at night. We can't see the stars until it's night. They're always there though. And so realizing that we all have challenging circumstances, and there might be people listening that are amidst some really challenging ones. And my invitation is, don't step over that. Let yourself be human in that, but also look for the Fruit Loops. Look for the little joys that can bring that boost of energy and boost of possibility outlook. And then realize that over time, it does become a stronger trained muscle, in which ultimately, this is what's super cool, is that that's when you start attracting more and more opportunities that are in your favor, that you desire in your life.
Well, at very least, I'm going to have to see if I can get my hands on some Fruit Loops for a difficult day.
I know I can't tell you how many clients and audience members that have reached back to me and said, I keep a box of Fruit Loops on my desk now. I remember you to just look for them, because it's such an absurd thing. But it's so hilarious because it's so simple. And that's the thing about it all, though, is I think so many people forget how simple and beautiful this life is. Like, I actually invite anyone listening to stop what you're doing and look around and just look for one little thing that you can see a little bit of joy in. Like, you don't even have to go anywhere or do anything. But I promise you, there is something beautiful, even in the tiniest of things, whether it's nature, you can see a witty advertisement, or you even, what's really cool with mindfulness, when you're so present, you get to see a beautiful interaction between two people. Or you can see like the butterfly land on the flower, or you can see something that you wouldn't have seen before, but you can actually look for a Fruit Loop moment right now, and you can generate it in like a minute or less.
As your following starts to grow, you might have to consider asking them for some sort of commission, though.
Maybe, but you know what? I just so believe that the more, I really do believe joy to the world starts with me. It starts with you. And when we do build on this, I don't need a commission. I just need a smile. And I just want to know people are out there living their best lives because we all benefit from that.
You just have to be careful that you don't get too many counter offers from other cereal providers.
Well, it was Fruit Loops that I had in the anyway. Yes.
What is the ripple effect?
Oh, the ripple effect really is the energy that we generate in the world. I mean, that's part of the idea of the prism, is that when we have, as human beings, are lit up and are our best selves, that we radiate out in the world. But when you are optimized, you radiate rainbows. And that ripple effect idea is the idea that you are having impact. We are all influencing and impacting each other, positive or negative. And yet when we take personal responsibility for our own joy, for our own life experience, we realize that we actually can have an influence that creates that ripple effect that actually ultimately becomes a ricochet effect, where it comes back to us and then it becomes like an upward spiral. But the idea is ultimately for each one of us to recognize that, whether we're intending to through business or we just care about having our family and loved ones in good places, that when we are in our best versions of ourselves, we naturally create a ripple effect energetically. We don't even have to say anything. That's something that's super cool. They have scientifically proven that when we're in a physical space and we're just feeling great, we can create a force field around 30 feet in diameter, which is super cool. You can be sitting on the tube and you can be generating joy and positivity and possibility for people on the train next to you. Or you can be sitting in your car, or you can be sitting in your household, like my son's downstairs. I mean, me and my joy right now, I'm bringing joy to my household. It's super awesome that when we start to realize that we can have that influence, that there is a gorgeous ripple effect that does take place. But then also realizing the reverse is also true, that when we take that personal responsibility, that when we're in a not great place, it becomes a reverse vacuum. We actually pull energy from others. And so it's kind of a loving nudge here to realize you're impacting people. You might as well make it great.
Well, you're currently, it's not 30 feet, it's across countries at this point. So
I know, that's the fun thing, right, about internet and digital format, which I'm so thankful for, that we can have this cool conversation. And yeah, we're cross continents. So cool.
is there any misconceptions about what you do?
Totally. That it's a nice to have. It's the biggest misconception that people are like, oh, when, I get that next promotion, or when the kids are out of the house, I'll take time for me. Or when I, get this thing figured out. And it's like, joy is not a nice to have. It's actually a medicine. Because when you are cancer doesn't live in joy, just for example. I mean, that's really part of what I believe how we healed my son. But cancer disease doesn't live in joy. And you might not have that someday. And to actually fulfill that someday vision of yours, or, anyone listening, joy is actually the path to get there, the path to fulfillment with satisfaction. Whereas when we wait to feel joy, when we wait to feel happiness, we might not ever get there. And the fact that it's inside of us first and foremost as the starting point, that's why it's mindful joy, as I was talking about earlier with the GPS. But so many people think that, well, if I just get my business structures together, or if I just get this thing handled, then I can find joy. But the truth is, when you are in that space of joy, that level of consciousness that is essentially two below enlightenment, you'll actually have greater clarity, and you'll actually have greater receptivity and creative and innovativeness to be able to put those structures in place, and to be able to have the wherewithal to follow through on them. Because as you know, as an entrepreneur, you have to show up every day no matter what. And if you're in that space of your soul superpower of joy, you're actually more likely to succeed. So all this to say, the biggest misconception that joy is a nice to have and a someday, and I'm actually here to say joy is the starting point. Everything else gets to be built from there, but it really is the basis of everything.
Great answer. Have you got any thoughts on like the typical business owner? I would imagine that there is a typical, let's say, behavior that they follow, and how they can implement some of the things that we've talked about today. What would you advise them?
Well, I would say, especially the typical leader entrepreneur, it's, we tend to be workaholics. We tend to want to push through, get it done, and like build Rome overnight. And so the way to implement the happiness prism is, and it's really simple, and this is what my clients are always blown away by. It's just starting off simply, but it's starting off with play. It's starting off with a Fruit Loop moment, and it doesn't have to take long. Like I said, there was a mad card game this morning before breakfast. Like that was a family connection. But it doesn't have to take long. It can be personal. It can be high energy, playful, or it can be very quiet and peaceful. I mean, sometimes even meditation now, it's taken me a while to get to this point, but meditation can be playful for me because I tap into visions and experiences in meditation that bring me joy. But just taking a few minutes just for enjoyment factor, nothing else. Like no agenda other than to attune to that good feeling inside. And like I said, it could be simple, like even just sipping a cup of coffee, but really enjoying it. And then step 2 is taking some deep breaths, tuning in, really centering. And again, it doesn't have to take long, although it is nice if you can take like 10 or 20 minutes to meditate, or to journal, or to just reflect, or quietly walk in nature, or to just be aware in general of the space that you're in, or if people are tuned into their own prayer practices, whatever that is, but tuning into peace. And then from there, looking at what are the most strategic actions that I can take that will really move the needle forward. And this is the space where my clients are always blown away at the results that they get, because a lot of times when they're taking the time for play and peace, things are starting in motion. That's when they go into their email and there's a whole bunch of responses, or there's, messages of like, I want to connect, or that long outstanding clients finally shows up again. And so what's really cool about this process is it's essentially, and even for especially the solopreneur, that it lets a team of, if you will, spiritual warriors do a lot of your work for you instead of trying to do it all yourself. Because I do think that's one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs and leaders face, is they think they have to do it all themselves. Even if they have a team of people, they're still so busy trying to make it all happen themselves that it's a challenge to step away and start to delegate and hand over. But that's kind of what we're getting to do when we start to be in this space of joy and honoring play and peace first. It's like, hang on, let's kind of let the powers at be take care of some of this for me, and then I'm just going to do the crucial actions that only I can do. And that process of the happiness prism can truly just take a couple of minutes to start, but then obviously it can get more and more intricate and detailed as people get more attuned to their prism. Obviously, in working with me, I guide clients to get even more tuned into the process. But just starting today, anyone listening can sit down and look at, well, what's an action I can take in play? What's an action I can take in peace? What's an action I can take in progress that's going to be the most impactful, and already feel a sense of satisfaction that allows for them to be set up already for better success within their day.
One thing that I just wanted to highlight and I wanted to mention it before, but just before we conclude, was that I've heard so many times about it's about the journey, or joy is in the journey, perhaps. And you've said it's actually in both. So it's in the journey and the outcome. And I think I've heard it that it's in one or the other, essentially. And if you're always focused on the outcome, then you're not happy in the journey. And if you're focused on the journey only, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the outcome in the first place, because, you wanted that thing for a reason. But if you're not actually getting it, you're just getting the journey, then it has no value, essentially, other than the progress. So I just wanted to highlight that as a thing that I took away of value. That's all.
Awesome. Well, and if I can add to that, the thing about having it as both, and look, we have a sign downstairs in our kitchen. I have like an ampersand because I'm such a stand for the and. But when you honor joy as the both and, it's not an or. Like, I just want people to hear that too, because so many times too, people think, well, I can have the business, but I can't have the happy life at home. Or it's like, no, you can't have both. And actually, when you have the and of the journey and the outcome, you get to be so much more. And it is so much more fulfilling. But here's the best part of it. When you have a desired outcome, a vision you're working towards, whatever it is, and you honor joy as the journey, as the vehicle, as the path, and then you actually achieve the outcome that you were desiring, it's even so much more satisfying and fulfilling and joyful that it's like, wow, I did it and I did it. That it's actually even greater than if you just achieved the goal.
Well, what are your goals, Jen?
Oh my gosh, I have a lot. I have several books in me, as you can imagine, that are just bursting at the seams, but I'm also kind of tuning into the timing of that. I do have a desire to be on a TED Talk. And, I just love influencing people in whatever positive way that I can. So that's my professional endeavor is obviously to share this message of joy and just owning you and building a no regrets life. But then on a personal note, my family and I love to travel. And I have some personal bucket list items as well of wanting to run a 50K trail run. And my husband and I would like to, sail an extended period of time with our kids and just so many things, but ultimately just live this life to the fullest is really, my big visions and desires.
I think you'd give an awesome TED Talk.
Thank you.
So when you meet that goal, feel free to send it over and I'll share it around.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything? Sorry, what were you just going to say?
Oh, this has just been such an honor and a pleasure here.
The pleasure is mine. It's infectious. The smiling is infectious. So thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to mention of value to the audience that I haven't asked you about today?
Ultimately, I just want to reinforce the piece about, and I don't think I said it this way exactly, but, joy, I really believe, is a divine gift, but it's one for us to receive. We're here on our own free will and we can choose to take it or not. And so my invitation and the takeaway for everyone is to realize you get to have a joyful life and it gets to be on your terms and you do get to just own you, and to realize that you too have Fruit Loop moments at any point in your day, at any point in your journey, and no matter what. So really just called to remind everyone, this isn't just for me. This isn't just for you, Thomas. It's for anyone, that they can go out as soon as today and have a great life, even if it's just a little bit. It gets to be incremental, but then ultimately over time, you get to turn back and go, wow, that really did happen. That really did happen. And it was awesome. So
great finish. Where's the best place for people to find you?
The easiest is probably my website. It's janhoath.com, janhoath.com. And then I am on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anyone in whatever capacity I may to bring joy their way.
Well, I've certainly done that today, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for all that you are bringing to this world as well.